I'm David Goldstein. I'm a mechanical engineer based in New York City, and I'm the founder and CEO of Hydronic Shell Technologies. Thank you so much for this opportunity to share my work with you today. The reason I founded this company over 5 years ago was to help cities solve a really urgent challenge that we're facing, which is what to do with all of our old buildings. And our focus is on multifamily, especially affordable housing. And this really is a huge and urgent problem. But it's also could be a huge opportunity if we can really figure out the right way to do it. And so that's what our work is really all about. Now, I'm going to share with you just one statistic. I'm going to share with you just one statistic in this presentation, which is that 60% of multifamily buildings in the US were built before 1980. So we have a lot of really old multifamily buildings in this country, and it's a problem for a lot of reasons, but I would highlight three main issues. So one is from an energy perspective. These buildings were built before energy codes existed. They consume a huge amount of energy, usually fossil fuel based energy. So it's bad for the environment. It's also expensive to operate such energy intensive buildings. So that's one huge problem. Another big problem is the indoor environment in these buildings. So they often don't have proper heating and cooling. Some of them don't have any cooling at all, which is becoming more and more of a problem. And they, for the most part, don't have proper ventilation systems, often no ventilation at all, which really has bad impacts on people's health and the indoor air quality in the buildings. So it's bad for the residents. And then the third issue is for the building owners. These old buildings that are in poor condition are very expensive to operate and maintain. They spend a lot of money maintaining these old HVAC systems, these deteriorating facades that are leaking. So it's bad for everyone, for the environment, for the people in the buildings and the owners of the buildings. So I had my first exposure to this problem about 6 or 7 years ago when I got involved with this pilot project with the New York City Housing Authority to install heat pumps on this building that you see here at Fort Independence Houses. And there were a few really important lessons that I learned from this project. The first was that tenant disruption is a huge challenge. So going into any occupied multifamily building and doing work is just really, really difficult. It's almost impossible to appreciate how hard it is until you've actually tried it. But it makes any kind of retrofit in these buildings just much more challenging. Second was that there was really no return on investment for the work we were doing. So we were electrifying heating by putting in heat pumps. And the work itself was somewhat expensive. And because we were switching from cheap natural gas to electricity, even though the system was more efficient, the energy bills were actually going up. So you couldn't get that kind of payback or return on investment that people typically look for when doing a retrofit project. The third was, the issue I mentioned before, the lack of ventilation in these buildings. I was really able to see how poor the indoor air quality was because they basically had no ventilation other than operable windows, and the air outside was already polluted, so that's really no help. And to me, it's a huge public health emergency actually to deal with the lack of ventilation in so many of these old buildings. And so that's something that really has to be addressed. Another important point was, when we came into this project, it was all about converting boilers to heat pumps. But what I realized is that when you're dealing with an old building with no insulation or poor insulation, a leaky building, you really have to combine that with envelope upgrades in order to bring the loads down. Otherwise, electrification really is much more difficult and in many cases not viable. And then the last point was just the lack of suitable HVAC solutions for dealing with this problem. I'm an HVAC engineer. I spent close to 20 years doing that now. And, part of my mission on this project was to find the HVAC solutions to help solve this problem, and there really weren't many good options out there. And so I'm gonna dig into that a little bit. So what I call the HVAC dilemma, what kind of HVAC systems can we use for these retrofits? And when looking at them, you can really split them into three categories. You have central systems where you have central heating, cooling, and ventilation equipment distributing it from that central location to individual apartments. Then the opposite end of the spectrum is you have unitary systems, which is essentially, if you think of like a through the window air conditioner, it's just a little unit in each room that's providing heating, cooling, and possibly ventilation to the room. And then you can also have kind of a hybrid, which it's kind of like think of it as having a central system in each apartment, like a separate little central system in each apartment. And so I'm going to take a few minutes just to unpack these a little bit. So we'll start by looking at central systems, and we're going to look at the pros and cons of each of these options. So the good thing about central systems is we're dealing with high quality commercial grade equipment, and it's really the best from performance perspective in terms of energy, comfort, indoor air quality, all of that. You're really going to get the best performance from a commercial grade central system, and the equipment is just much more reliable and has long service life. These systems are also much more flexible. There's so much more you can do in terms of making it more efficient with things like heat recovery, energy storage, connecting to geothermal, district thermal systems. There's just a lot more flexibility with a central system to enhance the efficiency. And then another really big thing is the maintenance. So when you have a central equipment, it means that the maintenance is centralized. So for the, owner and operator of the building, you don't have to keep going into individual apartments to maintain equipment. It's all centralized, keeps it efficient. This is what these buildings are used to today. They mostly have central heating systems, and it works well for them from a maintenance perspective. Now, there's a lot of problems as well, though, when it comes to retrofitting a central system on an existing building. So installation cost, of course, is higher. It's labor-intensive work, and it can take a long time to do that work. It's invasive, what I was talking about before, how challenging that is. You're disrupting tenants, you're running ducts and pipes throughout the building. And there's a lot of risks when you do that. You never know what you're going to uncover when you open a hole in a wall to put a duct or a pipe through it. Things like asbestos or, other surprises could be there. So, it makes it all very risky. And then overall, it's just a lot more complex. You need a whole design team going through design phase for the project. There's, permitting, and just the whole management of the project becomes a real burden and expense. So a lot of great things about Central, but a lot of problems that make it not really viable for this kind of application. So now let's look at the opposite end of the spectrum, which is the unitary equipment. So the pros here, one of the big ones is lower cost. Now, we're talking about electrifying heating in a cold climate. So these have to be cold climate unitary heat pumps, which are a little harder to come by. There's not as many options out there, and they're a lot more expensive than a typical, window air conditioner. But compared to a central system, it's certainly cheaper. The minimal tenant disruption is another big benefit. You're basically just going to the perimeter wall under the window to install it. You're not running new things all over the building. And it's not really complex. You probably don't even need to, file permits possibly. And the units, they're just standard units. You just pick it out of a catalog and install it. So it's low complexity. The one thing to note is it's possible when doing this kind of system that you'll need some electrical upgrades, condensate drainage. You might have to make facade modifications. But even with all of that, it's going to be a lot simpler and cheaper than a central system. So that's all great. But what are the cons of unitary equipment? So the really big one is the maintenance burden that it places on the building operator. So you now have a large number of units. So if you have 100 apartments in your building, you might have 250 or 300 of these unitary heat pumps in your building. So that's a lot of units to maintain. And, these are more complex than just a window air conditioner. That's why they're so much more expensive, is because they are more complex. And so the maintenance burden is quite significant. And then ventilation, this really important issue in these buildings. Unitary equipment, many of them don't provide any ventilation, but the ones that do, it's not particularly efficient or effective ventilation. The way you want to ventilate a building is provide outside air to the living rooms and the bedrooms, and to exhaust from the kitchens and the bathrooms, and then do energy recovery. There's no way to do that with a central system. With a unitary system. And then lastly, it's issues with service life and reliability. So these cold climate heat pumps are relatively new, so we don't actually know exactly what to expect for service life, but you can expect it'll be in the 10-year range, like a typical appliance, like a through wall air conditioner or PTAC unit. And so once you get this building operating, you're going to be going through these expensive replacement cycles. Once you get 10 years into your retrofit, you're going to have to start replacing these units, and that's just going to be an ongoing expense that's really problematic, especially when you look at how expensive these units are. So unitary is great from kind of a first cost, installation perspective, but it's really problematic from a life cycle, kind of cost and long-term perspective. And then there's hybrid HVAC systems, which I won't go too much into it, but the pros are they can be very efficient, they can provide great ventilation, and they're not as complex as central systems. The cons there is kind of the worst of both worlds. They're as expensive as the central systems, the installation is just as invasive, and you have that same maintenance problem that now you have all this little equipment all over your building that you have to maintain. So stepping back, I'm an HVAC engineer, and ultimately what we really want to provide is a high quality central HVAC system for these buildings. That's what ultimately we all want to live in ourselves, and that's what would be ideal for these buildings. And so what I really, started thinking about was how could we do a central HVAC system, get all the benefits, but maybe there's a way that all those negatives about central HVAC systems, maybe we can overcome those and actually make these central systems more viable for retrofits. And so to understand how to do that and what kind of got me thinking about it is we can look at work that was done on the facade side of things. So I mentioned that, facades really need to be upgraded as well in these old buildings. And in Europe, they started developing this solution to upgrade the facade where, they have the same challenges if they want to be non-invasive, they want to, make it cost effective. And the way they figured out how to do it is essentially using prefabricated panels that they install on the exterior of the building. So they're able to do it with minimal disruption. It makes the projects much quicker. There's less labor involved. It's really high quality components, and it's scalable. This can be deployed at a large scale. And so what Hydronic Shell is sort of building on this and saying, okay, that works great for the facade. Why can't we kind of integrate the HVAC into the facade so the two come together on the exterior of the building? And so this is what that looks like. So what we see here is new central equipment up on the roof of the building. The units in red are heat pumps making hot and chilled water, and the units that are white are the ventilation units supplying conditioned fresh air and then also taking exhaust air and doing energy recovery. And then you see all the distribution, the pipe and the ductwork is running in the exterior of the building within that new facade, that new insulated shell that's getting installed around the building. So let's unpack this a little bit. If you look at what's in these panels, we have this unit that we call the hydro box, which is our terminal unit, which is essentially a fan coil unit. It connects into the water, the hot and chilled water on one side, and the fresh air on the other side, and then delivers that conditioning into the room. And you can see here the way it sits under the windowsill. So we're showing how the existing window actually gets removed, and then this new panel gets installed on the exterior, and that hydro box sits between the new facade and the existing facade, just outside of the existing brick facade. And it provides that conditioning into the room through a grill at the windowsill. And so this is how you can install a central system, but have it be non-invasive, because everything you see here is installed on the exterior of the building. Actually, the only work that really has to happen on the interior is removing the existing window. So there are a number of important kind of technical, really performance advantages to what we're doing as well. So one is huge reduction in heating energy consumption, up to 95%, which sounds almost unbelievable, but it's really very possible because we're insulating the building. We're taking a building that is not insulated and making it super insulated. So that alone is, could be 80, 90% heating reduction. And then on top of that, we have a super efficient heat pump system that's using 95-degree hot water. So that's much lower temperature than a typical heating system, which means the heat pumps operate much more efficiently. We're also decoupling sensible and latent cooling. So that means that we're controlling temperature separately from humidity because we're using the ventilation air to control humidity. So it makes for much better efficiency and much better comfort out of the cooling system. And the other big advantage is we don't form condensate at the apartment level. So you don't have to worry about condensate drainage and running, new condensate lines in your building to get rid of condensate. When we do it this way, we have our central equipment, which is where the real power consumption is. So this terminal unit is actually very low power. It's just a small fan actually that requires some power, barely more than, an LED light bulb. And to power that fan, we're running new low voltage distribution within the facade, which means we don't have to worry about connecting to the existing electrical panel in the apartment. And it's great for electrifying cooking, which is also a big need in these buildings because what it means is we're getting rid of compressor loads like window AC units. We're getting rid of that from the apartment. So it's actually freeing up capacity to be able to electrify the cooking to allow you to do that without making upgrades to the building's electrical system in many cases. And then the last thing is just the simplicity of maintenance. Again, maintenance is a huge, huge thing for building owners and operators. And by having just this one small fan at the apartment level, the maintenance is very simple, and it can all be done just by going to the hydro box, lifting up that grill in the perimeter, and you can access whatever components you need very quickly and simply. The other big advantage I would point out is the ability of this system to connect to geothermal or district thermal networks. In a dense urban environment, there's huge advantages to being able to use thermal networks. Uh, but the challenge is once you bring that thermal network to the building, how do you distribute it throughout the building? And so this system really solves that problem. And so it works ideally along with those district systems. So this system is great, but not for every building. Every building is different, and so some things that are good for one building might not be great for another. So I'm just going to list out kind of what makes a building a good candidate for this type of retrofit. So multifamily or dormitory buildings, the simpler the geometry, the better. Simple squares, X-shaped buildings are ideal. This works really well for anywhere from 4 to 25 floors. It can even work above 25 floors, but it does get a little bit more complicated. Punched windows, you don't want, big floor to ceiling glass or anything like this. You need space on the exterior to run your distribution. And the construction of the building, you really want concrete masonry kind of construction because we're adding weight to the exterior of the building. So it needs to have a robust structure. If you have a wood frame or uh, light gauge frame building, it might not be able to support the additional loads. You want flat and open roofs to install your new central equipment. And you want to have limited exterior features, so things like balconies, fire escapes, things like that. If you have too much of that, it can really complicate the installation on the exterior. And then lastly, you want, kind of non-ornate facade because, kind of ornaments can get in the way. And also just, if you have a beautiful building, you might not want to cover it up. This is really ideal if you have a building that's not so beautiful and the new facade can be, a huge upgrade. But, if you have a historic, beautiful building, maybe this isn't the right choice. So now a really important question is, that people usually get to at this point is, okay, this is great, but how much does it cost? And that's a really important question, but I want to say that there's actually a more important question than that. And that is, what's the return on investment? And there's two reasons I say that. One is that buildings are investments. When people build buildings, when they buy buildings, they're doing it as an investment. They're not doing it to go find the cheapest building they can find. The idea is to get a return. The other reason is that when you do a retrofit like this, you're not paying for it upfront out of pocket. These retrofits get financed. So it comes down to, a cash flow situation. How much does it cost to service your loan versus what are your operational savings and how does that all add up? So that's why the really important question is what's the return on investment and how much does it cost is important, but only in how it reflects on the return on investment. And so what Hydronic Shell is it's really a solution. It's not designed to be the cheapest solution. Putting a new facade on your building is not cheap, but it's really optimized to provide the best possible return on investment to the building owner. And so to us, that's really how you get a solution to scale. So another important thing for us is how these projects are delivered. We want to make this as simple as possible for a building owner, and so we want to deliver them as turnkey solutions. So the way that looks is you have a solution provider who interfaces with the building owner. It's one contract with the building owner, and then the solution provider essentially pulls everything together to deliver the project, sort of as a design build, integrated project delivery process. So the solution providers, bringing in the project financing, they're coordinating the installation, the design work, and what we're doing at Hydronic Shell is we're providing the integrated facade. So we're on the facade and providing the hydro box for the HVAC system, but then we work with solution providers to actually deliver the project. And we're working with a really great partner right now called Cycle Retrotech, who's providing this service for our first pilot project. So now I'm happy to share our first pilot project with you. So this is a building in Syracuse, New York. It was built in 1954. It has 52 apartments, 7 stories. So very typical of multifamily affordable housing. You could find buildings like this throughout the country. It's being funded by grants for the most part from enterprise community partners, NYSERDA, Wells Fargo, and the Department of Energy. We're very grateful for all that funding. And this project will have an HVAC energy reduction of 82%. And that's despite adding cooling where there was no cooling before and adding ventilation where there was no ventilation before. And it's still an overall reduction of 82% because the system is so efficient. The net present value to the building is $4.8 million over 30 years. And the net operating income of the building increases from 18 to 42%. So this is a terrific long-term value for the building owner. And we anticipate construction to begin, if all goes according to plan, at the end of this year, 2025. Before that, though, we will be building a constructability mock-up. And so this is something we're actually working on right now. And the idea is because a system like this has never been installed before, we want to install it on a mock-up before we do it on the real building. So we're going to be working through all the kind of installation, construction details on this mock-up to get ready for the actual installation. And so this will be completed around May of this year. And I would like to just quickly mention our team. So we have 4 of us at Hydronic Shell Technologies. I'm really grateful for this amazing group that I work with. They're really the perfect team for the work that we're doing. But we are a small team, and the way we do what we do is by working with amazing partners. So on the design side, manufacturing, the R&D, and of course the installation, the contractors we're working with. It's really an incredible team. We're really lucky to be working together, and the idea is to work on this pilot project, and then after we prove it works, to go out and scale this together. So with that, I say thank you so much for this opportunity to speak with you, and I really look forward to sharing more as our progress continues.
David, amazing presentation. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I got a couple of questions for you. Do you have a few minutes?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, perfect, perfect. Um, so congratulations on this. I think this is really, really innovative and exactly what we were looking for here with our event this year. So, you talked about in some of the existing buildings, kind of the lack of ventilation that can create a negative indoor air quality situation. Um, and you said that you walked into some of the buildings and you noticed that some of the units had kind of poor air quality. Uh, were you doing any like real-time indoor air quality monitoring to determine just how bad it was, or was this just based off of kind of smell and using kind of human sense as opposed to monitors and indoor air quality sensors?
Yeah. So that's a great question. On the pilot project upcoming in Syracuse, we're going to be doing extensive monitoring of indoor air quality both before and after. So we will get really good data on that. That original pilot project that I mentioned, 6, 7 years ago, we did not do air quality monitoring, and it's kind of part of what kind of the problem we have in general is the air quality really wasn't on people's radars. They were thinking about heat pumps, we need to electrify. Air quality wasn't a focus of that project, unfortunately. But like you said, so just going in the building, you could sense the stale, kind of air quality and odors and things like that. But the biggest issue is just interacting with tenants and hearing complaints about indoor air quality. This is the case for our Syracuse pilot as well. One of the biggest things that really attracted to the Syracuse Housing Authority to doing this project was the air quality issues because they get so many complaints from tenants about air quality. You literally step in the building and you can just kind of feel it. And the building in Syracuse is actually a very well maintained building. They do a great job with it. But when you have no ventilation infrastructure, there's really not much you can do. Uh, like I mentioned, just opening a window is really not a way of getting proper ventilation. So we will have that indoor air quality data, as I mentioned, and yeah, we look forward to sharing it once it's available.
Nice, nice. Yeah. I'm really excited about your solution, especially because it's being done or piloted in my hometown of Syracuse, New York. So super excited about that. And I will say, of spending 18 years in Syracuse as a child and growing up to an adult prior to moving to DC, yeah, we didn't have air conditioning in our home. We just had a
Hmm.
window fan.
Hmm.
And
Yep.
with the climate situation as it is, the earth is heating up and summers are getting more uncomfortable. So to stay on the indoor air quality part, I noticed that you were working with the Syracuse University Center of Excellence, which is amazing. I've been to that. I don't know if you've been to the building.
Hmm.
Okay, amazing building. And they've done some amazing studies there as well. I'm trying to think of the name of the study with Dr. Joseph Allen, um, and Upstate Medical Center. It's slipping my mind at the moment. I can't believe I don't remember that. But at any rate, I didn't notice that the Upstate Medical Center was part of your partnership stack. And the reason I said that is because I think they may be interested in, especially since you're monitoring air quality, about how the building is affecting, the social determinants of health, and improving the situation with occupants that may have respiratory issues, asthma, those types of things. And it sounds like the potential for the building is that the reduced use of asthma inhalers and other equipment and reduced emergency room visits and reduced emergency room admissions for asthma, I think is a big deal. And I think the medical center would potentially be able to provide community benefit dollars to this type of work as well. What are your thoughts about on that?
Well, I'm really happy you mentioned it. It's actually that to me, that's one of the biggest challenges with these projects in general is, as you say, there's so much value in improving people's health on so many levels, whether it's, from an economic perspective, and just from a public health perspective and reducing strain on local hospital systems. There's so much value, but it's so hard to quantify that value. From a return on investment perspective, if you're a building owner, it's how do you quantify that value when you're looking at your funding stack for the project? So you hit on a really critical point where if someone like the Syracuse Medical Center can actually benefit from that value and therefore contribute to the project in some way, I think that could really help unlock so many more of these projects, because, at the end of the day, financing becomes one of the biggest challenges. And so finding additional sources could be a huge opportunity. So thank you for mentioning it, and I would love to connect with them.
Absolutely. I don't claim to have any immediate connections with them, but
Mm,
I've been in their buildings plenty of times, visiting
yeah.
family members who are ill.
Okay.
But also, so I remembered what it was. It's called the Cog Effects Study. The
Mm,
cognitive effects study was done by Dr. Joseph Allen, who's a public health professor at the T.H. Chan School of Public Health at Harvard, and he did a study with Upstate Medical Center at the Center of Excellence building, just measuring air quality, measuring, people work in a work type environment when you increase the particle matter and increase the volatile organic compounds, and kind of play with those situations, kind of a triple blind study. But it really talked about
mhm,
how people perform a lot better in healthy buildings. And so I love what you're doing with that.
yeah.
And so then let's get back to what you brought up in regards to ROI and payback period. You talked about ROI. I think you had a slide that says, what's the cost, which I'm sure everyone's eager to know. And then you mentioned, really focusing on the return on investment. But then I didn't see anything in regards to payback period. How are you kind of throwing that into your analysis?
So, when it comes to the economics of the project, there's different metrics to use, whether it's payback period or ROI. Um, the reason I don't give specific numbers in my presentation, well, there's a few reasons. One is that it will vary so much from building to building that just giving one number or even a range of numbers could potentially be misleading.
Yep.
Another issue is that we actually don't know the exact cost yet for this project. We're in the kind of design stages. We have our own estimates, but we haven't had contractors actually bid it yet. So it would also be a little misleading to provide numbers that, haven't been validated yet. And then the other piece of it is that, when it is the first pilot project, that's when it's going to be the most expensive. But, once it gets to scale and you do more of it,
Mhm.
then uh, the cost will come down.
Mhm.
I can, I shared some financial metrics on that slide about the project, about the net
Mhm.
present value, and about
Mhm.
the NOI, the net
Mhm.
operating income
Mhm.
increase.
Mhm.
I think we could translate that into an ROI roughly.
Mhm. Mhm.
But yeah, I don't really have an exact number to share. It's in like probably the high single digits. It's not like some, you know, you know, 20% ROI that everyone's going to drool all over and jump all over it. It's not that kind of
Sure.
number, but
Sure.
it's something that's reasonable. And the
And
important thing is it's
potentially
much
and, pot- and potentially a quicker payback than like solar, potentially.
potentially,
Yeah.
potentially, yes, it
Okay.
could be.
Okay.
And part of the problem is there's not really a better alternative. So, we would all
Right.
love to get, a 5-year payback, but
Right.
there is no 5-year payback, when it comes to modernizing an old building. It's just not going to happen. So the key is, not that we're going to hit this magic number of a really quick payback, but, at least figure out what's the best we can do and then get it to a point where at least it's financeable, uh, so that you can actually, do well in terms of the overall cash flow.
Well, my thesis is I think that's why I love focusing on the health and wellness part, and the
Mhm.
indoor air quality part, because I think that payback is immediate. When you can immediately change someone's and validate it through indoor air quality monitoring.
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
and see the immediate effects of changing someone's determinant of health.
Yep.
So then are you looking forward to your buildings that you're working on achieving any type of environmental certifications? Would they go from kind of being an older, outdated, kind of brown existing building to, a green efficient Energy Star rating, or are environmental certifications kind of not the focus right now?
I'd say it's not the focus, but uh, I shared the kind of cost or the energy savings,
Hmm.
reducing HVAC energy consumption by
Hmm. Hmm.
82%. We have metrics also like reducing the peak demand. I can't remember off the top of my head what that is.
Hmm.
And overall building energy cost and uh, use reduction uh, is, very significant. Uh, but yeah, uh, we're not going after any specific certifications, just I guess to kind of avoid the burden of having to go through getting those certifications. But really, if you look at what we're doing, it's very consistent with Passive House. So the
Hmm.
way we're
Hmm.
insulating the building, the way we're avoiding thermal bridges, making it airtight, the
Hmm.
balanced ventilation system.
Hmm.
And if
Hmm.
you look at our energy use intensity numbers, it's right in line with the requirements of Passive House. So
Hmm.
if we really wanted to, we probably could become Passive House certified, but it's not something we're going after for this project.
Sure, sure. Well, I love how you've modeled this after the and made improvements on what Energy Sprung is doing in Netherlands and EcoWorks in Germany. And I want to think that's how I originally discovered you, is because I've been following both of those organizations and just like, wow, it'd be great to see if we had somebody doing this in the US. And thank God for Google. I think I might have Googled it or YouTubed it and found one of your videos like, oh wow, there is somebody doing this. Not only are they here, they're on the East Coast, they're in New York, and they're doing a project in Syracuse, which is even more amazing. So so thank God for Google and the internet search. So you talked about ideal building characteristics. You listed maybe 8 or 10 of them. Are you finding that creates a smaller pool of opportunity, or does that still meet a large amount of buildings that would need to be retrofitted, let's say in the Northeast or nationwide?
So it it meets the criteria. There are many, many buildings out there. Let's say ballpark tens of thousands of buildings out there that kind of meet the criteria that we're looking at. It's kind of hard to find a database that's going to tell you exactly how many buildings are out there that meet all these characteristics.
Sure.
But it's a lot. And
Mhm.
we're in New York City, and New York City, all you have to do is kind of drive around the five boroughs, and these buildings are literally everywhere. It's just such a common typology, and especially for affordable housing. So, whether it was in Syracuse, New York City, or, kind of any city, that type of building is kind of everywhere. So whether or not, the exact number, we don't know, but it's definitely a huge number. And part of, our future work is to expand, the scenarios that it'll work for.
Mhm.
So, right now we want to start with the simplest buildings, the simplest geometries,
Mhm.
because this is new. But as we continue to develop the 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 technology, the idea is to be able to make it expand towards other building typologies,
Mhm.
maybe even beyond just multifamily, but other building
Mhm.
types as well. So this is kind of just the start,
Mhm. Mhm.
and then we're going to keep expanding to more and more buildings as much as we can by continuing to improve the technology.
Yeah, this looks like a great solution for like schools as well.
Exactly. Exactly.
So interesting fact about Baltimore. We've actually got more historic architecture than New York and DC combined. We have the most amount of historic architecture in the country.
Wow.
So I'm glad that our market is hearing about your solution, because I think we have a lot of buildings that fit your criteria. I don't know the last time you've been to Baltimore, but next time you come down, you have to get a crab cake for sure. But we definitely have those buildings that fit that criteria. So what would you say is your probably the biggest barrier to adoption? I know it's still kind of early days for the solution in regards to pilot, but what would you say is your biggest barrier at this point?
Well, to me, the biggest barrier is, um, well, I guess there's the obvious thing is, the money to pay
Hmm.
for
Hmm.
projects, which, any is always a barrier to doing anything. So obviously that's, somewhat of a barrier. But, again, once you can make it a good return on investment and finance the projects, I think that'll get worked out. But I think the biggest barrier at this point is just that it's new. And, the construction industry is very risk averse and for good reason. Buildings are very important, big expensive assets, and people don't necessarily want to take risks with them. And so that's very understandable. So I would say that's the biggest barrier is just, we have a lot of people who are very interested, but they all want to see it successfully applied to one or two or five or 10 buildings before they're ready to jump in. So
Yeah.
to me, that's the biggest challenge is just getting the initial pilots off the ground to really prove to people that it works. And then I think that'll, then we'll be able to break through that barrier. And that's why this pilot in Syracuse is going to be so important.
Yeah, unfortunately, our industry is the least digitized, declining in productivity and has a strong resistance to change. So no one
Hmm.
wants to be the first one out the gate.
Yeah, it's like no other industry.
But I think there's a lot of runway, especially in the community that you're doing it. You know that the relationship that you have with the Center of Excellence and the studies that they've done there, and the potential relationship with Upstate Medical Center, which is literally right, 10 blocks away.
Mhm.
Um, I think it's huge, especially when you're, elevating, health outcomes and that type of modeling in conjunction with the energy modeling and things. I think that opens up a huge opportunity for addressing the determinants of health. And so that would just be my 2 cents to because that community more than any other has been there for office. They've studied the effects on indoor air quality for
Mhm.
office.
Mhm.
And you're uniquely positioned to have that study extend to residential, which I think
Mhm.
is absolutely amazing. You couldn't have picked a better location to do that, to be perfectly honest with you. All right. So, hey, I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for your subject matter expertise, your thought leadership here. I think this is an amazing solution that you have here, and I'm so glad that we were able to share it here at Baltimore Climate Tech 2025. Is there anything that you want to let people know that maybe I didn't ask you, or something that you might want to mention before we close out?
No, not really. Just, we have a lot of exciting work coming up, so please follow our progress. And, just want to say thank you for inviting me to speak. And this was a great discussion. And I look forward to seeing the rest of the conference.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, David. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a good